So I think by identifying your own priorities and ranking them, it's a great step toward personal growth. And then having your partner or even a friend or a coworker do the same thing, it works for any relationship. It's best for a romantic one. I think most important to do one with your significant other, but it works for any relationship, even a friendship. And so taking stock of things regularly has a huge impact on your success in a relationship.
Nick, welcome to the show.
Aaron, thanks for having me. I'm psyched to be here.
Absolutely, man. My first and most important question is, how are you doing? Like, actually, for real, how are you doing?
Wow. I'm doing really well, actually. It's been a tough year. Going through a lot of changes, working on my book, and I've been learning a lot, just learning so much this year. It's been crazy, and any growth is a positive thing for me, even if it's through trying times.
Yeah. Has it always been the way you look at making mistakes and learning, or was there a shift somewhere in your life?
That's a great question. There was a big shift for me. I used to be very, very hard on myself and almost bully myself to make me do what I put my mind to. And I used to give myself like very harsh criticism and a lot of feedback to just negative messaging that I would tell myself, if I didn't do this, then I suck. Or instead of telling myself, if I do this, I'm great. And a complete frame shift happened for me actually when I was teaching high school. I used to be a high school teacher. I was a tenured high school teacher teaching computers. And I noticed that that's one thing you never want to do when you're teaching is give this sort of negative feedback or be harsh in that way. It's not the way to facilitate learning at all. So I noticed the way that I would teach my students is not the way that I would teach myself. I was being very hard on myself and not giving myself any grace through the learning process. I would always teach people, and still do, that you have to lean into the discomfort because that's where all the growth happens. And when I would do that, I would do so in a very harsh way, not allowing myself the grace to learn and be okay with not being good at it right away.
Mm. Yeah, as you get to know me, Nick, I relate everything to sports because that's just what I know.
Yeah.
So if yeah, anyways, everyone who regular listeners right now know that, but people who are here for you may not know. So but I have found that looking at myself and looking at a bunch of high level athletes, the majority of what pushes us is that harsh criticism. And it's sometimes really hard to say, I'm not going to do that anymore, and I'm going to switch to something that might be more positive because we feel like we might lose that edge. Like, for example, I had a bad game. I went 0 for 4 with 4 strikeouts. My harsh criticism would be, you suck. You're the fucking worst player in the world. Go to the batting cage right now. It got me to the batting cage, fixed my swing, got better for the next day. Now, was it the best way to approach me? Would I ever tell that to one of my teammates? Absolutely not. I'd be like, hey, dude, it's all right. Just one of those games. What can we do maybe to tweak it, adjust it so we're ready to go for tomorrow? I wouldn't say that to myself and be like, dude, you're the fucking worst player on this team. Go fucking figure it out. Right? And so, but that also at the same time was a motivator for me to get into the cage. Now, then, as you made that shift, I also made that shift, knowing that I can still motivate myself to get up and do the work, but there's a better way that I could approach it. Yeah, maybe after the game, it's 10 o'clock at night. I should probably get some sleep because I know that's really good for me. Then maybe wake up in the morning, then go to the cage early. Now I've actually created a better system for myself that's actually workable instead of, beating the shit out of myself every day verbally, which, yes, sort of motivates me to be my best, but it's not the most helpful thing that I could do. And so I find that anyone who's trying to do something great, like you writing a great book, or anyone trying to do anything great, like, yeah, that could be something that might get us off our ass, and we may need that at the beginning. Sure, if we're just like totally unmotivated, yeah, we may need like, hey dude, like, you just fucking got to do this, you know? But as we start to get the ball rolling, then I think there needs to be that shift that says, hey, let's be a little more gentle. Let's be a little more kind. Let's also prioritize some rest and recovery. Like you mentioned, like how would I talk to my best friend or how would I talk to my student? That should be the same way that I want to engage with myself. And I think that's an important point.
Yeah, it really is. Was there an epiphany moment for you where you made the shift, or was it gradual?
The epiphany moment came similar to you is when I started teaching other athletes, young athletes.
Mm.
You know, I didn't, because my playing career ended in 2014, right after college. And then I became a professional wrestler, like WWE style wrestling. And so that was just fun and entertainment. So I wasn't really beating myself up about that because I was just having a great time. But then I started coaching young kids, like I was telling you. And then it just creates such a mirror for me as a baseball player and an athlete and the things I wasn't doing and the things I thought were good. Who were my good coaches when I was growing up? What did they do? What did they represent? How could I represent that for someone else? Oh, I see this kid like really beating himself up about his at bat and putting so much pressure on himself. Okay, how can we change that? How can we shift that? How can I can be the model for that, for calm, coolness, for being, you know, cool under pressure and not letting mistakes bother me and understanding that we can learn from these things. And so again, it wasn't until I had to see it in a young person like, oh, Aaron, you're not doing this right. And you didn't do it right when you were playing. And so we always learn stuff in hindsight that we think, I'm like, oh, it's like I could have been such a better player. I'm like, you know, whatever, dude, career's over. You had a great run, you know, but like, it's always interesting. Like, that's why I think young people are so amazing, because they just they teach us so much about life, because they bring such a joy to the things they're doing. Maybe not in the classroom, you know, as a teacher, but you know, when they're playing ball, like, yeah, this is the best part of their day, hopefully, you know, and I want to try to create that. And I got to bring that sort of same positive type energy, even if my day was crap or someone just cut me off in traffic, whatever. Like, doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
Like, let's go, let's show up, let's play, let's do the thing we love to do.
I love what you said about them being a mirror for you, because that's so true. They're going to take on the things that you directly teach and the things that they see behaviorally from you and language wise. They're going to take it all on. And so you have to be so aware, if you're going to be a great coach, that or a great teacher, you have to be so aware of what messaging you're giving off. That's why I love learning, and that's what I love about teaching, is that it gives me a feedback loop for when I teach other people. It shows me a piece of myself that I wouldn't otherwise see, because I think that distilling knowledge is the greatest form of learning. If you can actually understand it and share it with someone else, then that's the best way to learn. It's also the best way to become, I think, great at anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that sort of segues perfectly into basically what relationships are, especially long-term, you know, long-lasting, fruitful, you know, meaningful, cooperative, reciprocal relationships. And I just got married, Nick, in
Oh,
September.
congratulations.
Yeah, September of last year. So I'm not just, but I think I'll say just married probably for a year, maybe for longer. Who cares? It feels good. It feels
Yeah.
fresh. It feels amazing. But when did you start really becoming interested in, you know, what makes a great relationship, the priorities in a relationship, things of that nature?
So I actually used to be a professional poker player, and I was the lead instructor for the World Poker Tour boot camp. I used to travel around doing seminars, teaching people how to play poker and doing a lot of poker coaching. And poker is life, kind of the way sports are life or baseball is life. You know, the mental game is such an important component. And if you have distractions when you're up there at the plate, you're not going to perform. If your mind is elsewhere, it needs to be very present. And when you're playing poker, the same thing is true. You have to be present for like 12, 14-hour days, many days on end sometimes. And so when I was coaching poker, I noticed that a lot of people would have mindset issues and distractions. And one of those big distractions would be their relationships, typically their primary relationship. So I ended up doing a lot of coaching, of mindset coaching, in addition to traditional poker training, as well as relationship coaching. And I got into it gradually from there quite a while ago. And then I just got more and more into the relationship coaching component after I stopped teaching for the World Poker Tour. I started doing personal development coaching and relationship coaching more as my primary thing.
Wow, I have so many questions about poker. I'll just ask you one, and then we'll get back to sort of the main topic.
Yeah.
But what makes a great poker player? because I find it very, very fascinating.
So the biggest thing that makes a great poker player is consistency. Consistently showing up, making correct decisions over time, regardless of the outcome. So it's poker is a game of incomplete information and it's an inaccurate feedback loop. It's not like if you do make the correct decision, you win the hand. Often you make the right decision and you still lose, and you have to go right back up there again in the future and keep making those good decisions, even if you're losing hands, because it's the long run that matters in poker. So as the number of hands you play increases, the likelihood of you winning if you make correct decisions also increases. So having that positive mindset or that positive frame of not being results oriented, but being decision oriented, focusing on making the correct decisions over time is the biggest thing. And doing that as consistently as possible with regard to the mental game is the thing that sets like pros apart from amateurs.
Hmm. Very interesting. I mean, that definitely mirrors life and sports.
Right?
I mean,
Right?
the less we focus on the outcome, the more we focus on making the right choice after the right choice after the right choice after the right choice, and trying to stitch, being in the present moment as much as possible. All of a sudden, you're 60 years later and you've lived a beautiful life. So yeah,
Yes.
um, I'm very interested in poker. I haven't played in a long time. My dad plays poker with his buddies every Tuesday night, and
Cool.
yeah, he's way smarter than me in terms of like engineering mathematical brain. So I think he like likes it. I didn't sort of get that genes from him, but it's cool though to like see my dad go and hang out with his buddies, because I feel like he's always shown me, speaking of relationships, right? He's always shown me to prioritize relationships, whether it be with my mom, they're
Wow.
still together, beautiful. He has this yearly trip with his buddies because we used to live in California that he prioritizes every year. So it's he's never said it, like he's never said, Aaron, you should have great relationships. He's always just shown me, speaking out all of this full circle. And so it's always been important to me to try and cultivate, great relationships. And so all these sort of points being, I just had this epiphany right now in my head while we're talking about my father. So that's really quite cool, actually, that we got there.
That's such a gift. My father gave me a similar gift. He passed away in 2006, but he had a home game with his brothers and his friends that ran for like 40 years every Friday night,
Wow.
and it was amazing. And he showed me how important relationships were too. So it's pretty
Yeah.
cool that our stories are similar.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Speaking of relationships, from all the work you've done, from the research you did for the book, where do sort of relationships fall apart, and maybe why?
Oh, okay, great. So it's a terrific question. So many relationships focus on surface level things like the current disagreement that's going on or the the argument that you just had, maybe the thing that's bothering you about the person right now, something that annoyed you, and people focus on that and they don't get at the underlying issues, which are actually the person's values and their priorities and what people find to be the most important and least important things in their lives. What I discovered is that when your priorities are aligned, you're much more likely to be in a low conflict relationship. You're much more likely to get along well. And when your priorities are misaligned, it's not that your relationship can't be successful, it's that there's more opportunity for conflict. So there's more communication that needs to be had in general, especially before the fact. And that's why I created Prioritize Us. Um, I created this total difference score, which allows you to line up your priorities with another person's top 10 priorities and create a score that shows you the difference between them and shows you how aligned you are. So, where conflict is likely to occur, where it's not likely to occur.
Do you do you find that people even entering a relationship don't even know their own priorities? So like
Yes.
it's hard to align it with someone else before because they're not really sure what values they even stand on?
Absolutely. That's one of the biggest things that happens when you read the book, I think, is you work out your own priorities explicitly and objectively on paper. And then you take a test that's data driven with your partner so that it's not subjective anymore. It's math. And People so often don't identify their own priorities. They don't identify how their priorities need to change or do change over time when life events change. They don't identify how much time they spend on each priority. They don't identify how satisfied they are and how much effort they put forth on each priority. So I think by identifying your own priorities and ranking them, it's a great step toward personal growth. And then having your partner or even a friend or a coworker do the same thing, it works for any relationship. It's best for a romantic one. I think most important to do one with your significant other, but it works for any relationship, even a friendship. And so taking stock of things regularly has a huge impact on your success in a relationship.
Yeah, I mean that's what I try to tell my friends who are currently single and looking for a partner. It's like it's pretty easy to say no to someone who you know doesn't already align with your values. But if you got no clue what you're looking for, how serious you want to be, how you want to raise your kids, if you want to have kids, is religion important? Like how much money do you need to make? Are you in a traditional household? Do you want her to work, you to work, both to work? Like if you don't know the answers to any of these questions and you're sort of just flying by the seat of your pants, then any woman or man who stands next to you could potentially be the one. And then now you're 6 months, a year later, and you're like, oh, this like didn't work out because you could have answered some very valuable questions, at the beginning. And so I think that's super important. At least that's sort of the journey I went on to be more intentional about trying to find someone I wanted to spend the rest of my life with.
That's beautifully said. I mean, those are all the variables that people need to take into account, but so often don't before they're entering a romantic relationship or a relationship of any kind. Knowing what someone's values are and their priorities is really what's going to impact the long term sustainability of the relationship and whether or not it's going to be mutually beneficial.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, you have this term called priority drift. Speaking of priorities, what is that, and why is it important for people to be aware of that?
So, priority drift is when you have a particular set of priorities, say a list of 10 things ordered 1 through 10. And then over time, these priorities gradually shift. And if you're not paying attention to them, you won't allocate your resources properly where you want them. My whole goal with people is for their actions to be in alignment with their intentions. So, in other words, what you want to happen, you make it happen. And if you're not aware of where your priorities lie and how you prioritize your time, you're going to make big mistakes. And sometimes priority drift happens gradually, but it can also happen suddenly when you have a baby or there's a medical crisis, some kind of life change occurs.
Yeah. Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Like how do you keep those priorities in line while major life events, affect you? Because that's just like life is never going to stay static. Life is never going to stay the same. We're up and down, this and that. Things happen. People die. You lose friends. You lose a job. You have a baby. Whatever, whatever, whatever. So is it just a constant communication about what's changing, or discussion with your partner, or what's the best way to go about that?
So I would set myself up for success by putting like regular check ins on my calendar. It could be monthly, it could be weekly, it could be twice a year. But the more frequently, the better. It only takes 5 minutes to check, to write down your priorities. And I would do it from scratch every time. I would take a look at my 10 priorities and I would number them based on what's most important to me. Take a good 5 minutes and really do the exercise. When you do that, you're going to be surprised at the results, how they change over time. And you're going to be really surprised about your partner's results. In fact, if you're listening right now, a great thing to do would be just to list your top 3 priorities. List your top 3 priorities and ask your partner to list their top 3 priorities. They don't have to be the same ones. They won't be the same ones. And you're going to be shocked by what you discover, maybe about yourself, but definitely about your partner.
And then maybe when they have those priorities and maybe they're different, what would be the next step on making sure that they're in alignment with where they
Okay,
want to
that's a
go?
great question. So the next step would be to adopt a learning stance. You don't want to be judgmental about their priorities at all. Everybody has their own internal priorities, and your goal should never be to change someone's priorities because it's what's most important to them. It's what they hold true. It's their values, and they change moment to moment, day to day sometimes. Sometimes work might be the top priority because you're on the verge of a promotion or getting fired, and it might have to be the top priority for the day or the week or the month. And you need to know when to allocate those resources to it. And so often when people um, are in a relationship, they don't communicate about their priorities at all. And so checking in regularly, taking a test, taking the total difference score, and seeing how aligned you are. If you have a high score, you're far apart. If you have a low score, you're nearer together. No one's going to get a perfect score. It's like 1 in a trillion to get a perfect score at the test. So you're going to have differences, and it's to embrace those differences and support them, have empathy, and adopt a learning stance. Really try to understand why your partner has the priorities that they do, not they should have this priority instead.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, curiosity in a relationship is like a superpower. I mean, I think it's
Yes.
generally a superpower, but especially with people that you love. Like it's so funny because usually we treat the people that we love the most so poorly or the worst out of anyone because we always feel like they're going to come back or they'll never leave me. And it's such a weird thing to think about for me. It's like this person, these are the people, mom, dad, sister, siblings, spouse. It's like I love them the most, but I am usually the quickest to them with temper. Would never say that to a friend, or you might say it on social media because that's a fucking cesspool of horrible shit. But that's besides the point. But I always found that that interesting, especially as a young teenager, and now I still have an amazing relationship with my mom, and how I would talk to her when I got home, or slam the door, or be smart, or snicky, but like knowing that she always loved me, she always loves me, she always will, she's amazing, but I didn't treat her as well as I could have. And I think especially for boys, we don't realize how great our mom is until we get older and have to do a lot of this stuff on our own and have to figure out our life and all these sorts of things. And I just found that interesting. Maybe you have something to say on that.
Yeah, I think so often we treat the ones that we love worse, it may seem, and sometimes it is worse because we're showing our true selves to them
Mm,
most of the time, or maybe all the time. And part of showing your true self to people is that they get the negative along with the positive.
mm,
For a long time, I lived my life in like a very compartmentalized way. I kept my world separate. I would have work here, romantic relationships here, friendships there. And what I discovered by doing that was that I was setting myself up for failure because I was only showing parts of myself to each world, and very rarely was anyone getting all of me. And so over time, I wasn't getting good feedback from people about who I truly am. It was hurting my growth because I wasn't learning from everybody that I could.
mm. That's a very interesting framework around it. You're saying it's because people are more authentic with those people. They can sometimes show up in those not so nice ways because they feel more comfortable with who they are potentially.
Exactly. And
Mm,
it's often a reflection of how they treat themselves too. Like when they're harsh on themselves, they're harsh to the people that are close to them. When they talk negatively and tell them, use negative, like we talked about earlier, telling yourself you suck and things
mm,
like that, you're more likely to say it to someone that's close to you that you love, because if you're treating yourself harshly, there's a much better chance you're going to treat other people harshly as well.
yeah, interesting. Um, Nick, do you ever listen to Dr. Jordan Peterson?
Yes, I think he's a fantastic speaker. He's
Yes,
amazing.
me as well. And he talks about his relationship with his wife all the time. And he always talks about how 90 minutes a week, him and his wife basically have a business meeting. What do you think about that? Like, sitting down, planning some time, having an actual discussion about where your relationship is and where you want it to go.
I love that because what so many people don't realize, I think, when they're thinking about a significant other and they're thinking about eventual marriage, is that it's not just a romantic relationship. It's also a business partnership. It's also a coaching relationship. It's a feedback loop. It's so many things besides just the romantic relationship. And thinking about your significant other in a way that recognizes their value and their input, and having a business meeting with them regularly, or having a relationship check in. I think one of the great things is to build rituals around growth and communication, whether it's like a 15-minute coffee or tea or drink together in the morning where there's no devices, no work talk, just connecting, and you do that every day, or a 5-minute phone call if it's really busy. But just building in a ritual into your daily life sets yourself up for success, for growth and connection in your relationship. And having a regular check-in where you look at your priorities personally and then compare them to your partners, I think is fantastic. I mean, in 15 minutes a week, you can have so much improved communication.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. There's a Tim Ferriss also highlighted this thing on one of his podcasts about this guy who created what's called Life Dinner. I don't know if you've seen this. Um, but it's very similar to a business meeting, but there's like, just like you have, right? Your 10 core priorities are like, let's write down our core priorities. What went well? What didn't go well? What do we need to work on? How are our finances? How's the sex life, intimacy? Stuff that a lot of people just ignore because it can be too challenging to talk about our money situation, or why haven't we been intimate in a couple weeks or years? And so we just ignore it and we throw it under the rug. But if you have this weekly, monthly, anything, something, life dinner, uninterrupted. I get it's harder if you have children and they're running around, but there's ways that you could do it, right? To sit down and just be with the person that you want to be with, that you said you want to spend the rest of your life with. And how can we work through some of these things that we say are important to us? And I think, it's valuable. My wife and I started doing it when we started dating, almost over 3 years ago. And going to try and continue it for the rest of our life to see how, fruitful and meaningful our relationship can be.
That's awesome. I'm sure it plays a big role in you staying connected and in you understanding each other, not only their priorities, but the other person's thought process, their decision making. I mean, if you want to talk about one of the most important things for setting yourself up for success in a romantic relationship, for it to be long-term, sustainable, mutually beneficial, look at how your potential partner is making decisions. What frameworks are they using? Are they making them impulsively? Are they being deliberate? How are they going about their decisions in their daily life and in their overall life plan if they have one? And it's important to know if they have one or they don't, because it's something you're going to build together or integrate. But having a shared vision is just critical.
Yeah. My my wife sometimes thinks that I can read her mind. I'm not there yet, Nick. I'm not there yet, but I'm close.
That's awesome.
And yeah, the shared vision though is really cool because in sports, when you're talking about a sports team and you want to get into a flow state with the team, one of the triggers for flow is, you guessed it, a shared vision. Because if everyone's nose and toes are pointed in the same direction and they're linked arms saying, I got your back, you got my back, of course we're going to get into a flow state where we feel optimal and we feel effortless and we're doing things that we love. So why wouldn't it be the same for a partnership romantically? That's a team. That's a little team. That's the most important team you're going to have. So why not know what that shared vision might be? It just seems so simple, but it's like most people don't do it. That's obviously why you had to write the book, so more people could get this information, right? But
Yeah.
it's just like once you really realize it, you're like, yeah, Nick was fucking right. Why wasn't I doing this before?
So many things seem simple once you start doing them, but to know that you have to do them is the difficult part. It's tricky because you don't know what you don't know. And that's why podcasts like yours are so great, because they shake people a little bit and make them aware of something that was invisible to them before. That's one of my goals with the book too, is to take these things that are underlying and invisible that are actually impacting your relationship tremendously and bring them to the surface so that couples can be aligned or understand where their alignments are different and work through that in a meaningful, productive way. People are like, I think, a piece of Swiss cheese. Everybody has gaps in their knowledge, but you don't all have the same gaps. And so we all have things to learn, but we have to know what we don't know before we can learn it. And I think having that curious mindset, like you talked about earlier, is the key to that.
Yeah. Let's jump in a little bit more to this total difference score. A little bit more. I mean, I know people can read the book to definitely get
Sure.
all of the information, but how did you create that? And, maybe what's a simple way if they want to start doing that?
Okay, great. So I created Prioritize Us. It was actually born out of a deeply personal and challenging time in my life when my now wife was experiencing some serious mental health issues.
Mm.
And for years, we didn't really know what was happening. She was having all kinds of problems, and the cause was really unclear. Um, she was having hallucinations and hearing voices and having paranoia, and it has a happy ending. I mean, she was eventually diagnosed with as a paranoid schizophrenic, and it has a happy ending in that she's on the right meds now. She's doing really well. She's really thriving. But despite the severity of our situation, our relationship actually improved during this time of turmoil. I noticed that all of our previous struggles with communication and small arguments, they kind of disappeared because suddenly health and safety became our top priorities. And for the first time, we were perfectly aligned. And this was kind of like an aha moment for me. It's like, okay, what are our other priorities? You know, if our priorities are aligned, things will become easier. Or if they're not aligned, we need to know what they are. So I began identifying and ranking 10 core life priorities. And I realized that couples that argue, it's often about surface level issues. And the real conflict comes from these misaligned priorities. So then I realized if we compare them to each other and we subtract one from the other, we'll get a total different score. So if I rank something a 1 and you rank something a 10, the difference between the two is a 9. So we take the total difference across 10 priorities, and that gives us an objective measure of how aligned we are. So it's a data-driven tool that measures priority alignment and misalignment between two people. And so I tested this method in my coaching practice, and I found that we were discovering hidden misalignments all the time. Some people had priorities that they've been together for years and they've never discussed. Some people who are in newer relationships avoided all this potential conflict because these things came to the surface sooner than later. And so I saw how efficient the system was, so I decided to prioritize us to help more couples navigate misalignment and prevent unnecessary conflict.
Who knew that math and data could help solve relationship problems?
Right?
Yeah, that's great. But speaking of your wife for a second, to also get a little personal and share some
Yeah.
of my own story that's very similar to your wife and her struggles with mental health. A reason why I shifted this podcast into what it is today, to talk about these sorts of things that are mostly important to me, which is mental health, personal development, trying to bring out the best in ourselves through relationships and storytelling and all of that, is because I lost my big sister Rachel in 2018 to suicide. She suffered from very similar things that your wife is battling through, and the reason her life was extended for so long is because she did get on the right meds at a certain point, but eventually lost that battle, and that was in 2018. It's been a little over 6 years, and so hearing that shifted you and also got your priorities aligned was the same thing that happened to me. My priorities got aligned. I had to figure out what I actually wanted my life to be and who I wanted to be. And that wasn't how I was living then. It took me a few more years to sort of figure it out and deal with my grief and all those sorts of things. But that's where I shifted my ideas about relationships and wanted to open myself up to eventually meeting my wife, who saved my life. And so, yeah, I just wanted to share that as a,
Wow.
yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. It's so powerful that you took something like grief and something that was a trauma or is a trauma and turned it into something so powerful to help other people. I mean, I commend you for that so much. This podcast is an amazing resource, and I hope you feel very proud of it. You certainly should. It's tremendous what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I feel the same about you, and where you've gotten to. It's
Thank you.
interesting. This is our first time actually speaking to each other.
It is.
It's you can always feel like a vibe on a podcast, when chemistry just is there, and it's always very energizing to have that. So, yeah, appreciate it very much,
Thank
and
you.
I'm
Yeah,
glad
I love it. I'm so happy to be here.
you wrote the book and moved in that direction with your life too. So let's jump into these 10 core priorities and tell me which ones you think are the most difficult maybe to discuss and also to prioritize in a relationship?
Okay, great. So just real quick, the 10 priorities that are the core life priorities are career, communication, entertainment, finances, growth, health, relationships, safety, sex, and spirituality. So with these 10 priorities, we're able to get a whole holistic view of our life and know really what's important to us right now and potentially what's important to us in the future, what's important to a partner. So the most difficult things that people have trouble discussing are definitely sex and spirituality.
Mm.
Both things are near and dear to people's heart. So many people find them very private. They're not used to always voicing these things out loud. If they do talk about them, they talk about them in very surface level ways. They don't go deep because maybe they're embarrassed or they're afraid what the other person might think. And it's interesting because it applies, this is a great question, it applies just as much to sex as it does spirituality. They're like opposite ends of the same spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah, sex is it's a tricky one. You know,
It is.
it's so weird now in our culture. You can see sex everywhere. Everything is fucking sexualized. If I want to go online and look at anything that I want, I can. Like I can
Yep.
look at more naked women online now than if I was the richest king in the world back in the day would see in his lifetime. Like that's
True.
crazy. The amount of just access. But still if I get with a person in real life, I'm still sort of afraid to talk about what I want or what's good for me or what I like or what I don't like or what I need or what's not. And yes, and like those things are not discussed, but because we're not really discovering who we really are by being like this voyeur on watching people, have sex, especially with young men who I'm really worried about. They're not going out and engaging in the world to figure out how to actually talk to a woman or engage with someone that they find attractive or get rejected a bunch of times or hear the word no and just be like, okay, thanks, and walk away in a bar. Just like doesn't happen anymore. And so all of these things sort of probably contribute to this weirdness we feel with talking about sex. Yeah, I can go see some boobs online, but I can't like talk to a woman that I am attracted to or tell her that I like her. Like those things just don't line up for me, and that's very strange.
Yeah, it's a very bizarre time that we're living in. There's just unlimited access to every kind of information, and you have to sort through it all and figure it out. And even with personal preferences, fetishes, things like that, people get very deep in their quests online to what they like and their preferences and things like that, but then sometimes don't share those things at all with the person that's most important to them in the world.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, what would you say maybe, Nick, to a young man who's trying to go out into the world and develop himself and create great relationships? What would be a good starting point for him to potentially develop himself? Would it be starting with his priorities, or what would you say?
So first, I would assess my own priorities to know what's important to me and start there. Then I would take a look at time on a weekly basis. How much time am I spending on each priority? So that way you get a sense of, am I spending time on the things that are most important to me? Am I not spending time on the things that are least important to me? Is it aligned? Then I would take a look at effort and satisfaction. I would look at each priority and say, how much effort am I putting forth on a scale of 1 to 10? How satisfied am I on a scale of 1 to 10? And if you do this, it doesn't take very long. It's going to be very revealing. You're going to be like, wow, I have some major leaks in my life game, like things that I can plug immediately if I make some changes. You'll see areas for improvement right away. And then you'll see some things that are harsh realizations like, wow, I did not realize I was spending that much disproportionate time on entertainment. I ranked it number 9 and I'm spending 20 hours a week on it. That's
Mm,
way out of whack.
that makes sense. So you're saying basically rank all of these your core priorities and then simultaneously map that onto how much time you're spending on it to see if it actually correlates with what's important to you and how much time you're spending on it.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, that makes
And then
sense
also,
because go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, and then also do the same thing around effort and satisfaction. Rank
Okay.
those across the priorities on a scale of 1 to 10.
Yeah.
And my priorities are a great starting point, but coming up with your own priorities or substituting your own for some of mine is something that's also important to do. Like you and your wife might make up your own list of the top 10 priorities and still use the total different score to assess them and measure it over time. So our priorities don't have to be the same. And there's an appendix in the book that shows you how to do that and make some recommendations.
Hmm. Yeah, because that's super important with the list and the time. Because people will say something's important, they'll say it all day, but really, what's revealed is how you act in the world. There's a saying with elite performers, especially with elite athletes. Maybe it's in poker also, but it's like the best in the world do what they say they're going to do. That's it. They say they're going to do it, they do it. There's nothing else. I don't feel like it today. I need to train. I'm good. No, I said I'm going to do it, so I'm going to do it. And that's a lot where I think people, where you talk about misaligned priorities, people have misaligned just words and actions, don't line up. And I think being able to see it on a sheet of paper and like, oh, there's my blind spot, like that's really powerful.
Yes, it's objective and it's data driven. You can't run from it. And if you share this results with anybody, a business partner or a romantic relationship, they're going to be surprised by how you spend your time. You're going to be surprised by how you spend your time. Everybody's going to be surprised. And I think it's such a key to growth is the habits that you build, how you allot your time, the routines that you create. And as your priorities change, checking in on them and making sure that your time allotment is still in sync is really something that's important to do for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the next topic that I want to discuss. You just mentioned it was habits. How do you think about now someone has discovered, where their misalignments are, whether it be themselves, their relationship? What do we start to do to maybe build those habits so that they can become, part of us?
Right. So it depends on the habit, but the most important thing is to interrupt it. Interrupt it beforehand if you can to preempt it, or interrupt it when it's occurring if it's a habit that you want to change. So it could be a bad habit like smoking, or it could be a habit like spending too much time on social media. So when you recognize the behavior, you want to pattern interrupt it and have a substitute behavior to go to, or a substitute thought to go to. So when you're drifting on social media and you're endlessly scrolling and you realize you're doing it, instead of just shrugging it off and continuing because you're sort of in that masturbatory mode, if you will. Instead of doing that, you pattern interrupt it and you say, when I'm on social media, instead of doing that, I'm going to do this instead. And you hop to a different app. Maybe you hop and you look at, maybe you hop and you do a 5-minute learning session on an app where you can get book summaries, or maybe you write down 5 positive things that maybe you do some gratitude, write down 5 things that you're grateful for, but pattern interrupt it with something that you want to be a part of your life regularly. And gradually you can shift away from these habits into something more productive. Just noticing it and deciding that you want to change, actually deciding, not saying I should change, not saying I have to change, saying I will change, and then honoring that promise to yourself. It's like you just talked about, the best in the world, they do what they say they're going to do. Mm-hmm. And you have to honor your own decisions. And when you make a priority list, honoring the priorities that you set forth is the key.
Yeah. Yeah, there's like a big distinction between wishing for something to happen and deciding something's going to happen. And I think that falls in line, perfectly with like, these are my priorities. No, bro, these are actually your priorities. You're wishing that these were, but now we can decide that these are going to be. One of my favorite sort of lines when it comes to all of this is like, the fastest way to improve your life is to stop doing the things that make you feel like shit. It's pretty simple. You know what I mean? It's like,
so true.
Like, it's like, not for everything, obviously, but like the little stuff. Like, okay, you scrolled on social for 45 minutes and now you feel awful. Okay, what's the process now, like you're saying, that I could stop doing that? Okay, I catch myself 15 minutes in and I still want to be on my phone because I got some free time. Okay, let me go to like a more productive app, or let me like text my friend who I can have a nice conversation with, or like you're saying, just interrupt that pattern. But if we never become aware that this thing makes us feel like shit, then obviously we're never going to change it. But we feel like a little blah. I just looked at all this stuff that people are doing that's so much better than me, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That makes you feel like shit. Okay, let's stop doing that. Let's try to interrupt it with something, or move it around, or maybe go for a walk, or do some jumping jacks, or whatever the case may be, to try and interrupt that cycle that you're just on endlessly.
Yes, I think paying attention to regret is very important. Like, what do you regret about your day? What do you regret about how you spent your time? Regret is a very powerful feeling, and I think if you tune into that, it's kind of a hack for what you should and shouldn't be doing in life.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Um, Nick, is there anything else that's important to you that I might have missed that we should discuss here?
I think that that focusing on your primary relationships and really paying attention to why you're with the person and if you enjoy learning about the person or not is is really so important to finding a lasting friendship or relationship. Taking that, adopting a learning stance and being curious about the person that you're with. If you're not curious about them and you don't want to learn about them, it's not the right person for you. Like, that's beyond a red flag.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so one of my goals with Prioritize Us was just to create like a simple, actionable system that empowers people and turns differences into opportunities for growth. So it's not just, the book isn't just a test that you can take, it's a roadmap, I think, for lasting love. And it gives you the tools to align, adapt, and grow together over time. And I think it's important to remember that relationships don't need to be identical to work. You don't have to have the same priorities as your partner necessarily. You have to have some of the same priorities, but not all of them. They don't have to align perfectly. Your goal should never be to change a person's priorities. It's to understand them, to see where you align so that those can be pillars of your relationship. Focus on the areas that do match, discuss those as well, and then look at the ones that are the most different for areas where potential conflict might occur. And it doesn't need to be identical, but it does require understanding, intentional conversations, and small but meaningful adjustments. And my journey with my wife really taught me that when your priorities are clear, relationships thrive, even under the most difficult circumstances.
Yeah. I have a sort of a self-indulgent question here, Nick. Uh, do you consider your wife to be your best friend, or do you like that sort of pairing, or are they separate for you?
That's a great question. My wife is definitely my best friend. We were friends way before we were ever married. We were coworkers, and we became good friends way before we ever were involved romantically. And I think that foundation really set us up for success. I think that when your best friend is different than your romantic partner, it might be a signal or an indicator that you need to strengthen your romantic relationship and become more of a friend with them, uh, become a business partner with them. Have a business meeting with them once a month, have a relationship focused only connection moment every day. But if you're not treating your romantic relationship like they're your best friend, I think that you're setting yourself up for failure because you're going to be sharing things with your best friend that you don't share with your significant other. And that means you're not going to be on the same page sometimes. And it's kind of like you're colluding against your significant other, which is going to create rifts in the relationship sometimes. If your best friend knows things that your significant other doesn't, it's okay one way, but maybe not the other. What is your stance?
Uh, um, I don't think my wife is my best friend
Okay.
because I have put the. I
Oh,
think it's
it's
just.
just the
I
amount
think
of
it's just.
time.
I think it's just a language thing for me. Like I have put my wife above best friend. So like I don't need to add that label to her because she supersedes all of those things. And so if I were to treat my best friend this way, I'm treating my wife better because she's above in that hierarchy. And so
Gotcha.
there,
She's your
so
top priority.
right. So I think, and I also think that like when my wife becomes everything, it's like I'm expecting her to be everything for me all the time. And I think that's
Ah,
too much for one person to hold because we see all of the time in these like rom-coms that this person is supposed to complete you. No, she's a complete person without me and I'm a complete person without her. But I fucking want to be with her and near her and next to her. And like, that's what makes it special. And so I still have my buddies and my best friends that I just shoot the shit with and tell them some stuff, but they come secondary to my wife. And so it's funny, uh, when she was giving her vows at our wedding, she was like, and I vow not to be your best friend. And it was hilarious. And, you know, cause we're on the same page about it.
right.
I think it's just like a language thing. Obviously I
It
treat
is a
her
language
as
thing.
the most important person in my life. I just like, I like my best friend. His name is Tyler, Sam and Al. Those are my best friends, right? They're not as important as my wife. They're very important, some of the most important people in my life. They're like my family, you know, but my wife beats them. And so I don't want, that's why I don't put them in the same sort of category. And when I tell people that without explaining it, they look at me like I hate my wife or something fucking crazy shit.
Well, I love what you said. It's actually a really brilliant point, and I'm so happy that you said it because it's the other end of the continuum, and it shows that there are multiple ways for a relationship to work. And I do think if your wife or your significant other is your best friend, that it's very critical and important that you have other relationships, other friendships that are very close to you. You know, they say that you're the average of the five people you spend the most time with. And so figuring out who those four other people are is really important. And you need to have a core group of relationships if you want to lead a happy, successful life. You know, there's this great study out of Harvard. You've probably heard of it. It's like an 85-year study where they show how important relationships are to longevity and to overall success and happiness. And so your wife doesn't have to be your best friend, but you should have a best friend and you should prioritize your wife over them. But you should have many people in your life who you prioritize, who you communicate with regularly, who you show love to often, because it's so important for your growth and for your success and for your well-being, your physical health and mental health.
Yeah, that's so funny that you mentioned the Harvard. I've study. I've literally mentioned that in almost every episode I've ever done on this podcast because it shows true. It shows
So
exactly
true.
what's important. Like it's a real study. It's 85 years, so it's like pretty fucking tight when it comes to the results. And it's like you need two things: good health, good relationships. Focus on that. Everything else is bullshit. Don't make it too complicated. Like eat well, move well, sleep well, think well, have great relationships. All right, let's go. Let's fucking have a great life. Like, because now we got so much other stuff happening. There's so many things that look shiny that might be this, and it's like, no, you just gotta be brilliant at the basics. What are the basics? I'm gonna nurture the relationships I have, and I'm gonna try to keep myself in good health. All right. Now, when all the other external stuff comes, sickness, stuff that I can't control, things that are just out, really out of my control, at least I have a foundation like to try and build this up on, like potentially when you grew with your wife and you guys are now stronger because of that thing. And I mean, that's very powerful.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really incredible. Um, the whole journey that you can go on that you went like similar to the one that you went on with your sister, just how you can turn tragedy into triumph almost. I'd say that what you're doing is a triumph and a tribute to your sister. And
Yeah.
so I really appreciate that about you and really respect everything you're doing. It was great to be on your show and talk to you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Nick. Thank you, man. Thank you. Love the book. People should go check it out. It's right here if you're watching this. Um, but Nick,
Prioritize
if
Us, available on
yes,
Amazon.
exactly. Yeah, if they want more of you, what best place? Instagram and then buy the book on Amazon?
Yes, you could follow me on Instagram at personal dev coach. or you can learn more about my work at nickbrancato.com. And I'd love to hear from you. If you want to DM me at Personal Dev Coach, I'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions about the book or thoughts or what you found most valuable about this podcast, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, all linked below in the show notes. But Nick, man, great to talk to you. Thanks for the work you're doing. Appreciate your time, and wonderful book.
Great to talk to you. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for tuning into that episode. And if you enjoyed it, click right here for another full-length episode of the podcast. And please don't forget to subscribe. But most importantly, above all else, please take good care of yourselves and others. And I'll see you next time. Lots of love. Cheers.